What's up, everyone? So, government efficiency is an oxymoron. It's like they basically coined the phrase public trust as a reminder that we're supposed to believe in something we rarely actually get to see. Then they have the phrase regulatory flexibility, which ironically only seems flexible enough to slow things down. And when they release a transparency report, it's mostly just blacked out text that basically leaves us guessing what they're actually hiding. It's truly remarkable how long the federal government takes to wrap things up or do its business. Enter the case of Max, and that's not his actual name. This is his name. But basically, his name is the latest in "Look at what I did, Daddy" PR statement from the DOJ. I always get a kick of how proud they actually sound in these things, like they rebuilt the pyramids in a week or something like that. Max was actually the guy who operated AurumXchange, a cryptocurrency exchange, from 2009 to 2013. And you definitely actually heard that right. That's the same crypto business that went dark over a decade ago. Apparently, even the glacial pace of investigation is acceptable when it's the government that's actually doing it. Now, Max is accused of processing over 30 million across 100,000 transactions during his exchange's actual operation. And some of these alleged links to accounts on the infamous Silk Road that we've all heard of. Now, for those keeping track, the Silk Road was shut down in 2013. Yet here we are, over a decade later, with the DOJ still dusting off their old case files and scrambling to hold people accountable. They've piled on charges, including money laundering, operating without a license, and lack of anti-money laundering, or AML, and know your customer, or KYC, protocols. Of course, it's worth noting that the government has a field day actually selectively enforcing these requirements, conveniently so when they need an easy target. Now, it's also worth it to point out the absurdity of things like operating without a licensing charge. I think anyways. This is totally personal opinion, but anything that requires a license is inherently something legal to do anyway, right? Like, you can't get a license to murder someone or to commit arson, right? I mean, there's no arsonist license. You can only get a license to do things that are already legal anyways. So to accuse someone, in my opinion, of operating without a license is effectively acknowledging that they were engaged in activities that would otherwise be perfectly legal if they had filled out the right paperwork. It's the equivalent of the government saying, you didn't ask our permission, so now we're going to destroy your life, basically. And that's because at the heart of the actual issue, it's really about asserting control, right? It's not about keeping people safe or crime prevention. The notion that operating without a license constitutes a serious crime is laughable compared to the reality of some of the harms to the actual public, like unchecked financial practices of massive institutions, for instance, which often end up with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Consider the countless examples of major banks laundering money for cartels, such as HSBC, which laundered billions for drug cartels, yet faced nothing more than a fine. The opioid crisis, which was fueled by pharmaceutical giants like Purdue Pharma, saw executives walk away relatively unscathed despite the immense harm that they actually caused. And these are real systemic abuses that damage society at a level that's unimaginable compared to minor licensing violations. The selective application of justice really shows us the true priorities, which is protecting the interests of those in power while making examples out of individuals who have dared to operate independently of the state. So I digress. We'll get back to Max. So he, unsurprisingly, made money on this exchange, which accumulated to like 10,000 Bitcoin, which at the time was worth about 1.2 million, and then converted those gains into US dollars, which were used to invest in real estate in Indiana. The properties now seized by the government include locations in Noblesville and Arcadia, Indiana. The value of these properties isn't astronomical. It's around like a little bit north of $500,000 combined. But the feds, of course, want every last cent. They might tarnish their reputation if they're not brutal and don't take every last penny. So it's almost iconic, though. While the government seizes relatively modest assets from someone like Max, they allow financial giants who committed far more substantial offenses during, say, the 2008 crisis to walk away without any consequences. And the hypocrisy is absolutely staggering in their quest for retribution. The government seized approximately $9.4 million from the 2 Morgan Stanley accounts that were linked to Max. Now, that's quite the haul for the government that perpetually is lamenting about how much harder it is to track illicit funds. Now, we're still waiting on the DOJ announcement with the indictment of the Morgan Stanley CEO, right? I mean, since anyone who's actually processing illegal funds is subject to the law, I won't be holding my breath. This is especially true when you look into it just a little bit and you learn that Morgan Stanley also donated almost $2.5 million in political contributions in 2024 alone. Mind you, that's direct contributions. According to Open Secrets, it's excluding the other $2,300,000 in just lobbying that they also spent in 2024 alone. So, question comes, was it Republican? Was it Democrats that they contributed to? It was both. I mean, one thing you have to give them is that they know how to hedge their bets, at least, right? Organizations are not actually supposed to be able to contribute directly to candidates. So instead, they funnel it through what they call affiliates. I guess no one actually told Max that he needs to pay off the shoeshine boys for the actual criminal bankers who own the country to begin with. Getting back to the actual story, the timing definitely raises some pretty big questions, in my opinion. The statute of limitations, for example, for federal money laundering charges is generally around 5 years. Yet this case, the government seems to have no problem and actually is in relatively comfort pushing that and claiming unspecified circumstances that extend this period. It's almost as if they're saying, we're the federal government and we'll bend the rules however we want. So of course, they'd never do that, right? Unless I missed something, I'm sure that Silk Road wasn't around in 2019. But hey, who cares about any of that? The feds do whatever it is that they want. I mean, I personally see it as authoritarian overreach disguised as justice. In this case, the DOJ's apparent disregard for statutory limitations points to a willingness to manipulate the law whenever it suits them, change the rules of the game as it suits them, a privilege that everyday citizens like you and me definitely don't have. To be clear, Rule 5C2, under which Max was actually arrested, is designed to expedite judicial process across state lines, yet there was no sense of urgency when the supposed crimes were actually committed back in 2013, was there? This is selective urgency. Speed when they need it, and inertia when they don't. This is nothing, though, compared to the fact that once you're a prisoner, you're like 10 times less powerful than you are as a free individual, even if you are just like a no power having regular person. And this is thanks to PLRA, or PLRA. Quick tangent, feel free to use the chapters and skip ahead real quick, but I really have to address this because it really shows how screwed up the entire kind of system is when you're in the feds. The Prison Litigation Reform Act, or PLRA, is one of the clearest examples of how the federal system is deliberately stacked against those that it claims to serve, especially when we're talking about people in it like prisoners. So PLRA is a government-imposed muzzle, basically, on prisoners. The act basically doesn't just make it hard, it makes it damn near impossible for inmates to do things like sue, even in cases of blatant abuse or misconduct. For example, you had women that were dealing with SA for years, severe bad stuff, from COs in a federal correctional institution called Dublin, which is a women's prison. One of the first videos on this channel was with a woman who was an inmate at that very prison. Pause this video and go Google it if you actually want to check it out. I dare you to. This isn't about justice. It's more so about silencing people to keep them quiet. Now, part of the nightmare is that before prisoners can even file a lawsuit with PLRA, they're required to jump through crazy, ridiculous hoops by exhausting all of these stupid internal grievance procedures. And this could take months. I've seen people have to restart multiple times and not actually be able to finish this process for 2 years. And this isn't to make the process fair, as most people would argue. It's to create endless dead ends. The grievance process is slow, it's opaque, and it's often set up to shut down complaints before they even see the light of day. It's absolutely a catch-22 for those who are in prison. And it's a win for prison officials. Most people in prison aren't known for being rich, right? Like, the vast majority of the population that is incarcerated isn't. Most U.S. inmates are actually in negative financial positions because they've been sentenced and they have massive fines or whatever, bills that are due that didn't get paid. They have all these different things that are kind of working against them already financially. Now, given that prisoners earn as little as 12 cents an hour, which was what I made as a head orderly, their monthly income barely covers even just basic commissary items, right? Let alone existing debt. And like, again, the whole point of this section is just to kind of tie in how screwed you really are once you get in the clutches of the system. And this step with them basically ensures that without any outside support, the average prisoner remains financially underwater, trapped in a system that's designed to perpetuate their negative balance. PLRA imposes filing fees on inmates, fees that they just can't afford. Now, like, these are people making literal cents an hour in prison jobs. And the government demands that they pay out of pocket to actually access any form of justice, regardless of what's actually going on. Now, keep in mind, the federal prison system also takes a percentage of their earnings on top of that. Like, it's not bad enough they pay them 12 cents an hour. If they have fines or fees, they take a percentage. And if that's not bad enough, any money that your family sends you is also subject to confiscation. So, I mean, don't like that? Okay, then you can refuse to pay. But things like good time will be a distant memory in that case. You'll have commissary restrictions. There'll be a bunch of things that they use to screw you over. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors can throw as much taxpayer money as they want at any case without batting an eye, which is hardly fair. And then we move on to the 3 strikes rule. If a prisoner files 3 lawsuits labeled as frivolous, a term which basically is completely subjective to a judge, they lose the right to file future claims without paying up front. And it's the government's way of saying, shut up, we don't want to hear it. And it's a brilliant tactic that basically ensures that anyone who challenges them too often is silenced for good. And you could still file, but with that label on your chest, you're never going to be taken seriously, and they'll gladly accept the filing fee, but you're never going to have it go your way. So PLRA was never really about prison conditions or ensuring fair treatment. It was about control. And it's designed to minimize accountability for prison officials and keep prisoners under the thumb of the system. Federal prosecutors, of course, face no such hurdles. They wield every tool without restriction showcasing, once again, just how one-sided and corrupt the injustice system actually is at the end of the day. So, all right, we'll get back to the actual topic at hand, which is Max. The DOJ's announcement in October of 2024 that they're charging Max with 5 counts of money laundering and 2 counts of willful failing to file tax returns feels almost comical. Like, imagine this. It's been over a decade since Silk Road, right? Since Ross Ulbricht was arrested and handed a life sentence, even though he didn't actually kill anyone. Yet the backwaters of crypto land, you still have the feds trying to find leftovers from Silk Road. And I would 100% say just for PR, but this is either an excuse for leave no stone unturned, which I doubt, or a display of absolute incompetence and inefficiency. My money would absolutely be on the latter, but I'd love to hear what you actually think this actually is. Is it the feds being super thorough and detailed, or is it them being complete idiots? Like, let me know in the comments. At best, it's to me, in my opinion, again, it's a waste of taxpayer money. And at worst, it's a show of power meant to remind the public that the state will always get the last word. And even if that means throwing a nonviolent drug offender, a guy who set up a website basically, and give him life. And again, it goes even further because it even takes more than a decade and violates their own statute of limitations rules. But if convicted, Max could face up to 10 years in federal prison and a fine of $250,000. But before anyone starts cheering about justice being served, which is absolutely the line that the DOJ tries to sell people on, it's essential to consider the actual real-world implications. The government's never-ending pursuit of Silk Road-associated actors is much less about serving justice and, in my opinion, more about showing up the public that the state still has some modicum of control over the ungovernable domain of the darknet. And might not be true with Bitcoin and other cryptos, granted, but it's definitely true of privacy coins. Remember, this government constantly fails to actually hold large-scale financial criminals accountable. The real movers and shakers, arguably, who brought economies to their knees. Like, this is, of course, totally not due to the fact that the same people donate to them or that some of the biggest criminals, Congress, have exempt themselves from various laws. I'm sure it has nothing to do with any of that. The reality is that the Justice Department's ability to actually enforce these laws depends more on luck and favorable timing than it does on skill or efficiency. In any case, thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.